All right, so the internet's in a bit of a tizzy because Keke Palmer on her network, Key TV, has a new show called Southern Fried Rice. Keke has directly addressed the internet because it was her money and her decision to invest in the Black writer Nakia Stevens' story about this Korean adoptee raised by Black people who decides to attend an HBCU. This coming of age story was met with a lot of confusion and then outright derision. There's two questions at the center of all this controversy, and the first one is, does this story about this Asian American woman deserve to exist at all in this moment? And the second question is, does our answer to that first question change if we understand that a Black woman wrote this series and Black women are producing it? And that's a cultural and political question absolutely worth our time. I'm going to say this up front. Asianness, Blackness, they're not monolithic experiences. There are experiences within experiences within experiences, and that can change depending on where in the world you're talking about. But our relationship to each other and ourselves is one that has been manipulated since the early 1800s by white supremacy in America. And depending on how we choose to redefine that relationship with each political era, that could change our society. And what I hope we can do is see how the discourse around this particular digital show can tie into a conversation that's been going on for a long time and that was recently reanimated when we looked at Black director and writer Ryan Coogler and his work on Sinners. That decision to highlight through an artistic connection the relationship between Black Americans and Asian Americans is important because this is a history we were not taught. And there's also this sense of urgency because we are continuing to exist in a political climate where division, even within the Asian American community, as to how to address factors like white supremacy are causing more pain. Look at the recent affirmative action case. There are approaches to facing white supremacy in your own community that end up hurting not only you, but other people of color as well. If you don't mind me getting personal, I will note how Asianness in the South helped me step into and understand my own Blackness. Disclosure time. Have I watched the whole season of Southern Fried Rice? Absolutely not. Are we here to just talk about the internet discourse around the existence of the show? Yes. Is there a chance that the show might not even actually handle or address the questions the trailer raises? Yeah, there is, but this is still a conversation worth talking about. And I am not in the camp of believing that Black women creators have to have absolutely perfect work for any of us to give it any amount of time. This is a show about a Korean adoptee named Coco Johnson. Now, the distinction has not been clarified if she was adopted from South Korea or if she was adopted from a Korean family in America. What we do know from the trailer is that she comes from this very Southern Black family. When it was time to go to college, she chooses to attend Wright University, which is this fictional HBCU based in Atlanta. Paige Yang is starring as Coco, and she's surrounded by this sizable cast of Black characters, including Cordell Buckham. Nakia Stevens, who created this show, also attended an HBCU, and she was fascinated by some of her classmates' experience with Blackness as non-Black people at this institution. She batted around and worked on a story around that kernel of that experience, and over time, her work ended up overlapping with Keke Palmer, and Keke Palmer saw fit to invest in this story. Keke Palmer has made a significant investment in making Key TV, this network, a runway for Black creators to produce, write, and direct. Both Keke and Nakia have been responding to this backlash by saying, we wanted to start these conversations. Keke's hope is that people will trust and be curious about what another Black creator, like Nakia, wants to tell the world. Now, granted, the criticism isn't that this Black woman shouldn't be writing. A lot of the chatter is around, why do we need to center this Asian woman? Why is she the main character? Why does the story seem so niche and improbable? And in this political moment, are we centering the right people? I think this critique misses the opportunity that this show is offering us. Now, granted, they could squander it. We haven't seen it yet. But there's an opportunity here nonetheless. It is not frivolous at all to have a Black production team and a Black writer focus our gaze on how the Asian American identity is formed among Blackness. It's actually long overdue. There are also aspects of this discourse that are revealing how we are socialized to quickly dismiss Asian American women's experiences as worth our attention. The way our American media has helped white supremacy disappear, the persistent poverty that plagues Asian American communities, especially immigrant ones that are not paid fairly, the sexist violence against Asian Americans, or the infantilization of Asian American men and women, that doesn't help the cause of Black power. The absence of discussing that does not give us more attention. It actually helps obscures a commonly shared block against those things, which is, whoa, white supremacy. Asian Americans have long occupied this third space in a racialized society. There are diverse countries of origins, different immigration histories, but no matter what, that Asian American experience or that Asian immigration experience has always been linked legally to the Black one. You cannot untangle the history of Asian American labor in this country from how white people used it to distance themselves from Black people. White people absolutely use Asian labor to prevent Black people from integrating their schools or their social spaces. In various parts of the South, Asian labor replaced liberated Black people. The laws against multi-ethnic marriages that ended up affecting everybody everywhere, and it became this whole thing that people had to fight for generations, that started because South Chinese immigrants were getting a paycheck and were ready to start families. You can try to separate the plight of Black people under white supremacy in America from the legal codes that govern Asian Americans, but you're not going to get very far. It was an interlocked, intentional effort to stop coalitions or solidarity from toppling an American economy. And none of this hides the fact that for all the friendships and alliances, there were still scarcity-driven tensions and fear. The famous unrest in LA over Rodney King, it wasn't just about him. There was this dispute over a small bottle of orange juice at a convenience store. At a Korean-American convenience store, the owner, Sun Ja-do, shot Latasha Harlins over $1.79. The Black community was horrified when all that came out of it was a probation sentence. The assuming criminality of a young Black child and then choosing to kill this child in self-defense, it sounded all too familiar. It was one social betrayal among many other social betrayals that would have ripple effects. And white supremacy has been more than happy to stoke these scarcity fears and say, look, your qualified Asian child is getting beat out by some unqualified Black child. There has been resentment over the generation that Asian American communities were given loans that were withheld from qualified Black communities. It hurt when there would be these moves to integrate and then Black people would get left behind. And as Charles Yu has said, when you climb the ladder and you win at the system, you don't break the system, you just reinforce it. In recent pop culture, there has been annoyance at how certain aspects of Black culture can stall a Black creative, but they could take a person like Awkwafina and turn her into a star. And this is all in the context of this long history of people from Elvis to Taylor Swift picking up and putting down expressions of Black culture and art to advance their careers. And some of us can't help but notice that with this continuation of South Korean cultural imports, there are aspects of Blackness that are derided on Black bodies, but are very profitable on Asian ones. And this is where cultural analysis and history can get really fun because none of these identities are existing in the silos people want you to believe they are. White supremacy is not totally about whiteness, it's about otherness, and that is how it defines itself. The trick of white supremacy is to make things invisible. Whiteness is postured as normative. Blackness is positioned as other. And Asianness, which could threaten the American white supremacist binary, is either made invisible or hyper-visible to fit the moment. Do you need an economic myth about pulling yourself up by the bootstraps or some meritocracy? Just trot out some stereotypes about Asian immigrant families. You can absolutely ignore how your men defined their masculinity as sexual subordination of other women, as long as you ignore what we do to Asian American women. You can further other narratives of anti-Blackness if you place Asians as closer in proximity to whiteness. And the Asian American body will continue to be politically expedient to racist people who want power because we continue to think that Asian American stories and the history of the construction of this economy are just not worth our time. The anti-Asian propaganda from 200 years ago, it is still working today. The devils are dead and clocked out from that era, and we are still thinking that Asian American experiences are peripheral and marginal. Now, fresh off the boat with this American sitcom that had 6 seasons is about Eddie Huang's life. The real life Eddie Huang has been very open about the fact that the local African American culture that he grew up in has deeply influenced who he is today. His initial formation of himself did not happen around other Asians. The people he looked up to figure out how to move as a non-white entity were other Black people. Eddie looked at society and he rarely saw himself reflected back. As a young girl in the South, unless we went to see family, that was also my story. I rarely ever saw my own reflection anywhere. I did spend a lot of time with a Vietnamese piano teacher who was like my second mom. And at Phillips Exeter, my piano teacher was a Korean woman who was living permanently in this small white town. The first kid who confided in me that she had also been called the N-word was a Filipina friend of mine. The kids who surrounded me who knew what it was like to have made it but yet never be accepted, they were Asian kids. For a good period of time, the Asian American experience was the only thing I saw that reflected back anything of what I was experiencing. Those kids affirmed something about my town that people just did not want to admit. The over-sexualization of Black girls, it has overlap with Asian American girls. There's overlap in the erasure of us in media. This social obsession with the multi-ethnic versions of our community, also there. Black and Asian women have constantly been regulated to service industries. The submissive Asian woman and the angry Black woman, very convenient. Those standalone tropes are also identities that are pit against each other. What does it mean to be Asian American, and can you answer that question without talking about Blackness? Are we ready to talk about an adoption economy in the American sin that's all wrapped up in that? And the fact that a story about a Korean American woman was written off as having nothing to do with Black people is exactly why it should exist. Just because we didn't know to ask for it doesn't mean we don't need it. These are questions that we don't have to dig for. They're right there in the storyline. And this show has a Black voice forcing that conversation. And judging by the response, maybe it's one we're not ready for. Get the fears of not wanting to use Blackness as a stepping stone to prop up somebody else's journey. Let's hear these Black writers out. If it doesn't stick the landing, we shouldn't be afraid to broach the subject again. There are Korean adoptees who have a very particular relationship to whiteness that no one bothers to ask them about. I think it would do us good to get curious about the stories white supremacy never wanted us to know.